Good morning, children. Today in class 9, Social Science and History, the French Revolution, we'll try to understand how slavery came into existence and how it was ultimately abolished. It was a very inhuman practice, of course. Now, the abolition of slavery, one of the most important revolutionary reforms, rather a social reform that we can say, was brought about by the Jacobin regime, and this was abolished by the Jacobins. In the French colonies in the Caribbean, that was like Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Dominico, were the important suppliers of tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. Now, when the French people needed workers for plantations, people were not willing to go to different places. People were not willing to go to faraway places, unknown lands. So, that is how the practice of slavery began. So the slave trade actually began in the 17th century, and this was what we called as a triangular slave trade. That means between Europe, Africa, and America. Now, French merchants sailed to African coast, bought slaves from the local chieftains. Just imagine there's a system where, like today, we buy goods and commodities with the help of money. In those days, these slaves, or what used to be known as the Negroes, which is a word that is no longer used now in the present times. So they used to be purchased from them and brought back and then sent to the different places in Europe and American and the colonies that they had formed already. So throughout the 18th century, not much was talked about the slavery in France. That means people did not criticize, although they held debates. There were certain discussions also. So it is that the slavery system continued in France. The National Assembly did try to hold debates, have discussions, whether the rights of man should also be given to the French subjects, included those people who lived in the colonies. But nothing much was done. Because, why? Because they feared opposition from the businessmen. Now, the businessmen flourished on account of the work done by these slaves. So, their business was prosperous, they were flourishing. But in 1794, the National Convention passed a law. And by that law, when this law was passed, it declared the slavery to become illegal. And it freed all slaves in the overseas colonies also. So that was how it came to be abolished. But this was a short-term measure because when Napoleon came into power, he brought back the practice of slavery. He reintroduced the slavery practice. But finally, it was abolished in 1848. So finally, this practice of slavery came to an end. Now, if we see further on that what was the impact of the revolution on the everyday life of people. After 1789, there were many changes that took place in the lives of men, women, and children also. One important law was after the storming of the Bastille or the attack on the Bastille, it brought about abolition of censorship. Now, censorship means when the press and the media is controlled. During the old regime, all written material and matter, cultural activities like books, newspapers, plays, could be published or performed only after they were approved. And who approved them? The censors of the king. That meant that there was no freedom of press at all. There was a censorship. So this abolition was a very major achievement of the time. And the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which gave the freedom of speech and expression to all the people. It became a natural right for them, that is, the freedom of speech to express what they felt and to express their views and the opinion about events or whatever issue that they felt about. So, gradually newspapers, pamphlets, books and printed pictures were plenty in market. They flooded the towns of France, and from there it also traveled to the countryside. That means in the villages where people were not aware of the ideas that the philosophers had propagated of liberty and equality and all that was spread to the parts in the villages as well. So freedom to express opinions, hold discussions and describe the events and changes that were taking in France became common. So this was something which was not there earlier. So censorship, the abolition of censorship was a very major change that brought about the freedom and gave the people the freedom to express their views and their opinions regarding matters. Now, to conclude, we can say that in conclusion, that when in 1804 Napoleon had become the Emperor of France, he was a great conqueror, of course. He conquered the neighboring countries and created so many kingdoms. And wherever he had created kingdoms, he had also left his own people, that is, members of the family, to look after those kingdoms. So he played, but at the same time, there were certain good things also that he did. Like one was that he was considered to be a modernizer of Europe. There were certain changes that he had brought about, and that had a major impact on Europe as well. He introduced many laws. Now, one of them happened to be the protection of private property. So this is a major law that was introduced to protect the rights of the people and to protect the private property of the people. And secondly, the second major law that he had also introduced was a uniform system of weights and measures provided by the decimal system. So some of these laws had a very major impact not only in France, or not only on the people and the lives of the people in France, but it also spread to other parts of Europe as well. So the measures that he had adopted, that he had carried out, these were revolutionary ideas like of liberty and modern laws. It also spread to the other parts of Europe. So we see that the ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. If probably things would have been different otherwise. During the 19th century, these spread to the rest of Europe. That means other countries which had not become liberated, where these rights had not been enjoyed by the people so far. So they were greatly influenced by these ideas due to this revolution. So it is said that during the 19th century, these spread to the rest of Europe, where feudal systems which were existing came to be abolished. That meant the people had come to realize that feudal system was not really good for them. So it was ultimately abolished in those places also. And over the rest of the world also, one can say that wherever the people were colonized, so the colonized people began movements, began to struggle to create a sovereign nation state, to achieve freedom and attain freedom. So these ideas of liberty and democratic rights, which started from here, had a major impact on the rest of the world also. In fact, in India, Tipu Sultan and Ram Mohan Roy also were inspired by the revolutionary ideas, because we also were colonized at that time. So these ideas of freedom and liberty and equality granted to these people had spread to the rest of the world also. It brought an end to the system of monarchy in France. It you can say changed the system of governance. That is, where a system where privileges were given to the people under the monarch. Now all those were changed now. Now everybody was given equality, equal opportunities were given to all. So we see that all these had the history of these ideas that we get to know through this lesson.